Katya Dvorak was 29 years old when she disappeared from a Connecticut highway in February 1989. Her car was found with a flat tire, the door open, keys in the ignition, but there was no blood, no signs of struggle, no Katya. For 26 years, investigators had no answers, until a woman in Prague revealed a secret she'd kept since 1989, a secret about her brother, about obsession, and about murder. February 18th, 1989, Bridgeport, Connecticut. Saturday night, 28 degrees, cold enough that breath turned to fog in the parking lot of the East European Cultural Center. Inside, the room was alive with music. Czech and Slovak immigrants had gathered to mark an anniversary 20 years since Soviet tanks rolled into Prague and crushed the Prague Spring. That brief moment in 1968 when freedom seemed possible. The room smelled of homemade kolache pastries, sweet dough and fruit filling. Bottles of vodka moved between tables. Old Czech folk songs crackled through tinny speakers. Families had driven hours for this, from New Haven, from Stamford, from Boston. These gatherings weren't just social events, they were lifelines. Proof that even in exile, community survived. Katya Dvorak sat at a corner table near the window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. She wore a navy blue sweater, slightly too large for her thin frame. Dark brown hair pulled back in a tight bun. She was 29 but looked older. The kind of aging that comes from worry, from always looking over your shoulder, from living in a country where you don't quite belong. She'd emigrated from Prague in 1985 on a tourist visa. When it expired, she stayed. For 4 years, Katya lived in shadows, working cash jobs at restaurants where owners didn't ask questions, cleaning houses, always careful. Deportation was constant fear. One wrong move and she'd be sent back to Czechoslovakia, back to a father who drank himself unconscious, back to a country where dreams died. But 6 months ago, everything changed. The Immigration Reform Act finally processed her application. Katya received temporary work authorization, a small laminated card with her photo, a government stamp that said, "You are allowed to exist here." For the first time in 4 years, Katya could breathe. She got a real job at Eric Wallace's restaurant, opened a bank account, started thinking about the future, citizenship, nursing school if her English improved, a life that felt less like hiding. Tonight, she was doing what she did most weekends, helping younger Czech families navigate America's bureaucratic maze. Immigration forms in legal English, social security applications, rental agreements designed to confuse. Katya's English was limited, but better than most. She'd taken night classes, checked out grammar books from the library, studied until pages were dog-eared. She practiced with customers at the restaurant, slowly building vocabulary that might let her become who she wanted to be. 15 people would later tell police they saw Katya that night. She seemed normal, maybe even content. She smiled, helping a young mother understand a medical form, nodded patiently when an elderly man asked her to translate a Social Security letter for the 3rd time. Nothing strange happened, just another Saturday night at the Cultural Center. At 10:30 p.m., Katya stood, pulled on her worn winter coat, a heavy wool thing from Goodwill, $12, wrapped a scarf around her neck. A few people waved. "See you next Saturday." Katya smiled and waved back. She walked across the frozen parking lot, boots crunching on ice-crusted snow. She reached her car, a gray 1982 Buick Century bought for $800. The Buick wasn't beautiful, wasn't reliable, but it was hers. She started the engine, let it warm, then pulled out. The Buick's taillights glowed red in darkness. Someone would later remember that detail, how the taillights looked like 2 small fires disappearing into night. And then they were gone. Katya was gone, driving north on Route 9 toward New Britain, toward home, toward a life she'd never reach. Because what nobody knew that night, what nobody could have known, was that someone had been watching Katya for weeks. Someone who'd followed her from the Cultural Center before. Someone who couldn't accept rejection. And tonight, that someone would make sure Katya Dvorak never made it home. Katya lived on the 3rd floor of a tired brick building near Franklin Square in New Britain, a building full of Eastern European immigrants, Poles on the 1st floor, Lithuanians on the 2nd, Czechs and Slovaks on the 3rd. Every apartment spoke different languages, but everyone understood the same things: hardship, resilience, survival. Below Katya's apartment lived Victoria Hayes, 67 years old, sharp-minded. She kept meticulous track of the building's rhythms. She knew when people came home, when they left for work, when something was wrong. Every Saturday night, Victoria heard the familiar pattern from above. Around 11 p.m., Katya's key in the lock, 6 steps from door to kitchenette, kitchen faucet turning on, water running 30 seconds while Katya filled her kettle, then footsteps to the window table, then silence. That's how Victoria knew Katya was home safe. That's how Victoria knew the world was in order. But that night, Saturday, February 18, 1989, the ceiling stayed silent. Victoria didn't think much of it at first. Maybe Katya stayed with a friend. Maybe she'd gone somewhere after the cultural center. But by Monday morning, when Victoria hadn't heard a single sound from upstairs, when Katya's apartment remained dark even after sunrise, something felt wrong. And what Victoria didn't know was that Katya would never walk up those stairs again, would never make tea in that tiny kitchenette, would never sit by that window, because somewhere on Route 9, in the cold darkness of Saturday night, Katya Dvorak had vanished. Monday morning, February 20th. Eric Wallace opened his restaurant at 6 a.m. like always. Katya was supposed to arrive at 6:30 for breakfast prep, slicing vegetables, brewing coffee, setting tables. Eric liked Katya, reliable, quiet, never complained. When 6:30 came and went with no Katya, Eric felt concern. By 7 a.m., when she still hadn't arrived, hadn't called, the concern grew stronger. Eric tried calling her apartment. The phone rang and rang. No answer, no machine, just empty ringing that felt ominous. Eric tried again at noon. Still no answer. He told himself she must be sick, but Katya had never missed work before, not once in 6 months. When Tuesday morning arrived and Katya still hadn't shown up, hadn't called, Eric knew something was seriously wrong. He called Nathan Reed at the Cultural Center. "Have you seen Katya?" Nathan hadn't. He made calls. No one had seen her since Saturday night. On Wednesday, Katya missed an appointment at the social services office. Jenna Morrison, her caseworker, made a note. Client failed to appear. No call, no explanation. Jenna didn't raise an alarm. Immigrants missed appointments all the time. They got nervous. They moved. They feared government offices. Jenna assumed Katya would call eventually. She had no way of knowing Katya would never call again. By Wednesday afternoon, Nathan Reed made a decision. He called New Britain Police Department. A woman named Katya Dvorak was missing. She'd left the Cultural Center Saturday night and hadn't been seen since. The desk officer took down information, but Nathan could hear the disinterest. He misspelled Katya's last name as Dvorak in the report. Gave Nathan a case number. Said someone would look into it. The case number felt meaningless. Just numbers on a form that would probably never be read. But no one looked into it. Not immediately. Katya Dvorak was an immigrant with limited English and a paper trail so thin it was almost invisible. In 1989 Connecticut, cases like hers slipped through cracks. Especially when the victim was someone most people didn't know existed, the case might have died there, buried in paperwork and indifference, if not for a state trooper on routine patrol. Because 5 days after Katya vanished, someone finally found her car, and what they found inside would raise more questions than answers. Friday morning, February 24th, 1989. Connecticut State Trooper Connor Davidson was 6 hours into his shift, driving Route 9 between Wethersfield and Berlin. A stretch of highway he knew well, mostly empty this time of morning, bordered by dense Connecticut woodland that looked peaceful in winter. Connor was thinking about coffee, about whether he had time to stop at the Berlin diner before his shift ended, when he spotted something unusual: a gray Buick Century, parked at an angle on the shoulder, partially blocking the narrow breakdown lane. The car sat about 50 yards ahead, body covered in frost. Connor slowed, flipped on his lights, pulled over behind it. He grabbed his flashlight and approached cautiously. The first thing he noticed was the flat tire, right rear, completely deflated, rim sitting on pavement. Then the door. The driver's side door was wide open, swinging slightly in the morning breeze. Snow had drifted onto the front seat. creating a small white mound that glittered in sunlight. Connor aimed his flashlight into the vehicle's interior. No blood, no signs of violence, no body. The keys were still in the ignition, dangling from a simple metal keyring. The engine was cold. Connor touched the hood to confirm. The radio was on, tuned to a jazz station out of New York, though the battery had died and only silence came from speakers. On the passenger seat sat a large canvas shopping bag. Connor looked inside. Fabric, sewing supplies, spools of thread, an unfinished piece of embroidery showing a garden scene. On the floor, partially covered by snow, was a brown leather purse. Connor picked up the purse carefully, like it was evidence of a crime he didn't yet understand. He opened it. Inside was a temporary work permit with a photo ID. The woman had a serious face, dark eyes, high cheekbones, an expression suggesting someone who'd seen hardship and survived. The name read Katya Dvorak. Date of birth, March 15, 1960. Address in New Britain. In the wallet section, $23 cash, a social security card, a library card from New Britain Public Library, worn from use, and tucked in a small pocket, a piece of paper with neat handwriting in Czech, a poem Connor couldn't read. Connor radioed for backup. Within 45 minutes, Detective Logan Pierce arrived. Logan was 38 years old, 12-year veteran of Connecticut State Police, reputation for being thorough, patient, unwilling to give up on cases others might dismiss. He stepped out of his unmarked car and immediately felt something wrong settling over him. An abandoned car wasn't unusual, but an abandoned car with keys in ignition, wallet inside, money untouched, that was different. Logan and Connor spent the next 2 hours methodically searching the area, walking both sides of Route 9, looking for footprints in snow, searching for signs someone had walked away. But a week of accumulated snow had covered everything. Whatever trail might have existed was gone. They checked the trunk. The tire iron was there, wrapped in cloth, unused. The spare tire was properly secured. Logan stood by the driver's door and tried to reconstruct what happened. Katya Dvorak was driving home Saturday night, got a flat tire, pulled over. Then what? Did she get out and walk for help? But the nearest gas station was 3 miles either direction. Would a woman walk 3 miles on a frozen highway at night? And if she did, why leave her wallet, her money, her ID? Did someone stop to help her? But if someone helped her, why didn't she take her purse? And if someone forced her into another vehicle, why was there no sign of struggle? No torn fabric, no scuff marks, no indication violence occurred. The Buick was towed to State Police impound. Forensic technicians spent hours processing it. They found dozens of fingerprints, most Katya's, some unidentified but likely from previous owners or mechanics. They checked for fibers, hair, anything suggesting a second person had been in the car. Nothing unusual. They tested for blood using luminol. The entire interior glowed negative. The car told them nothing except that its owner had simply vanished. But Logan knew better. Women don't vanish without a reason. Someone had taken Katya Dvorak, and Logan was determined to find out who. Meanwhile, Logan drove to Katya's apartment in New Britain. He met Victoria Hayes at the building entrance, a small woman with sharp eyes and hands that trembled as she unlocked Katya's door using the landlord's key. Logan stepped inside and felt like he was intruding on a life frozen in time. The apartment was painfully neat. The bed made with military precision, corners tucked, pillow fluffed, dishes washed and stacked in the drying rack. On the kitchen table sat a library book Czech novel by Milan Kundera with bookmark halfway through. In the laundry basket, Logan found a blue dress waiting to be ironed, presumably for church on Sunday. Logan checked the phone. Old rotary model, heavy, permanent. He picked up the receiver and dialed the memory function. 4 numbers stored: Eric Wallace's restaurant, the cultural center, social services office, and an international number. Logan tried the international number. After clicks and mechanical sounds, a recording in Czech informed him the number was no longer in service. He hung up and looked around again. No threatening letters, no evidence of an ex-boyfriend, no bills marked past due, No signs Katya had been running from anything or planning to disappear. Logan filed a missing persons report, but something gnawed at him. He'd worked missing persons before. He knew the patterns. When a young woman disappeared, resources mobilized quickly. Search teams, media coverage, public appeals. But Katya Dvorak was different. She was an immigrant. Limited English existed on the margins. Logan knew cases like hers didn't get the attention they deserved. They slipped through cracks, became file numbers instead of human beings. But Logan refused to let that happen. He refused to let Katya Dvorak become just another forgotten immigrant. The first organized search took place Sunday, February 26th, 8 days after Katya vanished. Logan coordinated the effort, but it wasn't the kind of search that makes headlines. No hundreds of volunteers in matching t-shirts, no church groups with sandwiches, no news helicopters. Instead, 15 people showed up, most from the East European Cultural Center. Older people, thick accents, work-worn hands. They combed woods on both sides of Route 9, checking under snowdrifts, searching frozen creek beds, calling Katya's name into silent forest. They found nothing, not a scrap of fabric, not a footprint, not a single clue. Nathan Reed sat down with Logan at a diner afterward and provided everything he knew about Katya. She'd left Prague in 1985 on a tourist visa. When it expired, she stayed. Lived illegally for 4 years. Always afraid, always careful. Then last year, she applied for temporary work authorization under the amnesty program. It was approved. She was legal for the first time. Clean record, paid taxes, had no conflicts with anyone. What about family in Prague? Logan asked. Nathan shook his head. Katya rarely talked about her past, too painful. But once, late at night after an event, after she'd had wine, unusual for Katya, she'd mentioned her mother died in the 1970s. Cancer. Her father turned to alcohol, became violent, unreliable. Katya had a brother, but they didn't speak. Some kind of falling out. Nathan didn't know details. As far as he knew, Katya had left no one behind in Czechoslovakia, no one who would notice if she disappeared. Boyfriend? Logan asked. Nathan almost laughed. Number. Katya kept to herself, too busy surviving to date, too cautious to let anyone close. Enemies? Nathan shook his head. Katya was kind, quiet, helpful. Worked at the restaurant during the week. Weekends at the cultural center helping immigrants with paperwork. Read constantly, Czech literature from the library. She'd taken English courses at community college. Had dreams of nursing school. But first, the language barrier. Logan tried to reconstruct Katya's final night. He interviewed 15 people from the anniversary gathering. Everyone said the same thing. Katya seemed normal. Not upset, not anxious. If anything, she'd seemed content. She helped people. She smiled. She drank tea. Left at 10:30 p.m. Alone, waving goodbye. Nothing strange. But one witness, Dylan McCarthy, who'd been outside smoking, remembered something. As Katya walked to her car, Dylan noticed another man in the parking lot, walking toward a different vehicle, a large car, American-made, dark-colored. Dylan couldn't see the man's face in darkness. But the car stood out, looked expensive, maybe a Lincoln, maybe a Cadillac. Dylan hadn't thought anything of it at the time. People were leaving. Parking lot was emptying. But now, looking back, Dylan wondered, had that man been watching Katya? Had he followed her? Logan pursued this lead, but it dead-ended. No security cameras, no license plate numbers. Just one man's hazy memory of a dark luxury car. Then another witness came forward. Blake Anderson, who worked night shift at a Bridgeport gas station. Blake remembered a woman stopping late Saturday night with a car trouble. A gray vehicle. The woman seemed confused, didn't speak much English. Blake had offered to help, but she'd waved him off, got back in her car. When Blake finished helping another customer and looked back, the woman was gone. Was that Katya? Blake studied her photo. Maybe, he said. I think so, but I can't be certain. It was dark. She was far away. I didn't get a good look at her face. By May 1989, 3 months after Katya vanished, the case went cold. Logan's supervisor, Captain Trevor Hayes, called him into the office. They couldn't allocate more resources. No evidence of foul play, no suspects, no witnesses, no body. Maybe Katya just left, Trevor suggested. Maybe she got spooked and started over somewhere else. Immigrants did that, but Logan knew better. Katya's wallet was in the car. Her money was in the car. A woman doesn't run away without money and ID. Someone had taken her. Logan was certain. But certainty without evidence is just frustration. And frustration doesn't solve cases. The file went into storage. Weeks became months. Months became years. Katya Dvorak became another unsolved case. Another name in a file cabinet. Another immigrant woman who vanished and was forgotten. But Logan never forgot. He kept a copy of the case file in his desk drawer. Sometimes late at night when the station was quiet, he'd pull it out and read through witness statements again, searching for something he'd missed, some detail that would crack the case open. He never found it. But he never stopped looking 6 years after Katya vanished. Detective Megan Phillips joined Connecticut State Police Cold Case Unit. She was 32 years old, daughter of Taiwanese immigrants who'd come to America in the 1970s. Megan understood what it meant to exist between worlds, not quite American, not quite foreign, always having to prove you belonged. When her supervisor assigned her to review old missing persons files, Megan started with a simple criterion: cases involving immigrants, cases involving people the system had failed. Katya Dvorak's file was thin, just 47 pages, witness statements, police reports, a few black and white crime scene photos of the abandoned Buick. But as Megan read through it, she felt anger building. This case deserved better. Katya Dvorak deserved better. A 29-year-old woman vanished from a highway with her wallet and money left behind. And the investigation lasted barely 3 months. If Katya had been a white American woman from a wealthy family, the search would have continued for years. Billboards, TV appeals, reward funds, but Katya was an immigrant, and immigrants were expendable. Megan picked up the phone and called the number for the original investigating officer, Logan Pierce. Logan was still with state police, now 44 years old, nearing retirement. When Megan explained she wanted to reopen the Dvorak case, there was a long silence on the line. Then Logan's voice, thick with emotion. "Thank you. I've been waiting 6 years for someone to care." Megan started fresh, re-interviewed everyone from the 1989 investigation still alive and still in Connecticut. Some had moved, 2 had died, but most remained. Memories faded but still present. Nathan Reed was still running the Cultural Center, now in his 70s, moving slower but mentally sharp. He remembered Katya clearly. "Sweet girl," he said, "deserves so much better than what happened to her." Megan dug deeper into the Cultural Center's records, attendance logs, event sign-in sheets, volunteer rosters, financial records showing who donated, who participated, who showed up regularly. And there, buried in the 1988 to 1989 volunteer list, Megan found a name that made her pause: Owen Brooks. According to records, Owen had volunteered frequently in 1988 and early 1989. He'd attended the same events Katya attended, helped with the same activities. And then, in March 1989, just weeks after Katya vanished, Owen's name disappeared from records. He never came back. Megan made calls, tracked down people who'd known Owen Brooks in 1989, and what they told her was disturbing. Owen had been obsessed with Katya. He'd asked her out multiple times. She'd always refused. But Owen didn't take rejection well. And then, suddenly, he disappeared too. Left America without warning, fled back to Czechoslovakia, and was never seen in Connecticut again. After 6 years, the case finally had a suspect. Allison Blake was 68 years old when Megan interviewed her in 1995. She'd been one of Katya's closest friends at the Cultural Center, close enough that Katya had confided things she told no one else. Allison remembered Owen Brooks very clearly. Her expression darkened when Megan mentioned his name. "He made Katya uncomfortable," Allison said. "He would stare at her during events. Not casual glances, long, intense stares that made everyone notice. He'd find excuses to talk to her, stand near her, offer to drive her home even though she always said no. Katya was polite at first. She'd smile and decline. But privately, she told me he scared her. She said he didn't understand boundaries, that he acted like she belonged to him even though they'd never been together." "Did Katya ever report Owen to anyone?" Megan asked. Allison shook her head sadly. Katya was undocumented back then. She was terrified of making trouble, of drawing attention. She thought if she complained, someone might report her to immigration, so she just tried to avoid him. She'd leave events early if he showed up. She'd sit on the opposite side of the room, but Owen always found her. "Did you see Owen the night Katya disappeared?" Megan asked, leaning forward. Allison thought for a moment, eyes distant with memory. "Yes," she said finally. "I remember now. Owen was at the anniversary event. I saw him in the parking lot when people were leaving. He was getting into his car, a dark Lincoln, big and expensive looking. I remember thinking it was strange because Owen usually lingered, tried to talk to Katya one more time before she left. But that night, he got in his car quickly, almost like he was in a hurry." Megan felt electricity run through her. A dark Lincoln. Dylan McCarthy had mentioned seeing a Lincoln in the parking lot in 1989. But Logan had never been able to identify the owner. Could it have been Owen Brooks? Megan spent the next week tracking down every detail of Owen's life in Connecticut. She found his work records employed as a mechanic at a body shop in Bridgeport, found his apartment rental history, and found his vehicle registration, a 1986 Lincoln Continental, dark blue, registered in his name from 1987 to March 1989. Megan tried to locate Owen Brooks. She contacted Czech Republic's Interior Ministry, sent formal requests for information about a Czech national who'd returned in 1989. It took weeks for a response. When it finally came, Megan's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Owen Brooks had died in Prague in 2003, age 46. Complications related to alcoholism and liver failure. But there was more. According to Czech police records, Owen had been arrested multiple times between 1989 and 2003. Public intoxication, assault, theft, disturbing the peace. He'd become increasingly unstable and violent after returning from America. One arrest report from 1997 noted, subject became combative during booking, shouting in English about having to leave and her not understanding. Subject was heavily intoxicated and incoherent. Megan requested Owen's border crossing records from 1989. The documents showed he'd left the United States on March 15, 1989, flying from JFK to Prague via Frankfurt, less than a month after Katya vanished. And there was a notation, handwritten by a U.S. Customs agent. Subject appeared nervous and evasive during screening, avoided eye contact, declined to answer questions about reason for departure and length of stay in U.S. allowed through due to valid passport, but behavior noted as unusual. Megan and Logan met at a diner to discuss findings. They spread documents across the table, timelines, witness statements, Owen's records. Together, they built a theory. Owen had been obsessed with Katya for months. He'd asked her out repeatedly. She'd refused every time. On February 18th, he'd seen her at the cultural center. He'd waited in the parking lot, watched her leave, followed her. When Katya's tire went flat on Route 9, Owen saw his opportunity. He stopped, offered help. At first, Katya might have been relieved someone she knew from her community, but then Owen confessed his feelings again, told her he had been waiting for her, that they belonged together. And when Katya rejected him one final time, when she tried to leave, Owen snapped. He killed her, probably quickly, one blow, maybe two. Then he panicked, put her body in his car, drove to a remote location, buried her, returned to the Buick, left it staged on Route 9 to look like she'd walked away, then fled the country before police could connect him to her disappearance. The theory fit perfectly. The timeline worked. The evidence supported it. But there was one devastating problem. Owen Brooks was dead. He'd died 12 years ago. He couldn't be arrested, couldn't be questioned, couldn't confess. And without a body, without physical evidence linking him to the crime, the case remained frustratingly incomplete. Megan refused to give up. She spent the next 8 years periodically revisiting the case, contacted Czech authorities again in 2000, asking if they had information about Owen's family. Received a response in 2001. Owen had one surviving sibling, a sister named Isabel Scott, living in Prague. Megan sent a letter to Isabel through official channels, asking if she'd be willing to discuss her brother. The letter was returned unopened. Note attached. Recipient refuses contact. Megan tried again in 2005, again in 2008. Each time the same response. Isabel refused to speak about her brother, refused any contact. The wall seemed impenetrable. Until November 2013, when Megan's phone rang at 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, international call from Prague. A Czech police detective named Mason Clark was on the line. English heavily accented but clear. "Detective Phillips? I'm calling about Katya Dvorak case. We have someone who wants to talk." Owen Brooks' sister. She is ready to tell the truth. For 24 years, Isabel Scott had kept her brother's secret. She'd carried it through sleepless nights, through decades of guilt, through watching Owen destroy himself with alcohol and self-loathing. But guilt has a way of surviving even death. And by 2013, at age 76, Isabel Scott could no longer carry the weight alone. She was dying, and she couldn't die with Katya's blood on her conscience. Megan immediately arranged to fly to Prague. She brought Logan with her. He was retired now, but insisted on being there. Insisted on seeing this through after 24 years. They met Isabel Scott at a small Prague police station on a gray November afternoon. Isabel was thin, frail-looking, white hair, hands that trembled as she held a cup of tea. A translator sat beside her. 2 Czech police detectives observed. Megan turned on a recording device and began. Through the translator, Isabel told her story in a voice barely above a whisper. In April 1989, her brother Owen had appeared at her apartment door unannounced. Late at night, after midnight, he looked terrible, unshaven, wild-eyed, drunk. Isabel almost didn't recognize him. She let him inside, made him coffee, asked what happened. At first, Owen wouldn't say. He just sat at her kitchen table, rocking back and forth, crying. Isabel had never seen her brother cry, not even when they were children. Finally, Owen spoke. He confessed everything. He said he'd killed a woman in America, a Czech woman named Katya Dvorak. He'd been in love with her, he said, but she didn't love him back, wouldn't even give him a chance. He'd followed her one night when her car broke down, stopped to help. But when he told her his feelings, when he tried to make her understand how much he cared, she'd rejected him again, told him to leave her alone, said she never wanted to see him again, and something inside Owen had broken. He struck her. Just once, he claimed, with a tire iron from his trunk. She fell, didn't get up. He'd panicked, couldn't leave her there on the highway. So he'd put her body in his car, driven deep into the woods, buried her, then returned to her car, made it look like she'd walked away. He drove home, packed his things, fled back to Czechoslovakia the next morning. He'd been running ever since. Isabel asked him why he didn't turn himself in. Why didn't he face justice? Owen said he was afraid, didn't want to go to American prison, didn't want to die there. So Isabel made a choice she regretted every day for the rest of her life. She didn't call police, didn't report her brother. She let him stay in her apartment for 3 weeks until he found his own place. She fed him, protected him, kept his secret, because he was her brother, because she didn't know what else to do. For 24 years, I carried this, Isabel said through the translator, voice breaking. I watched him destroy himself with alcohol. Every night he would drink until he couldn't stand. When drunk, he would say her name Katya, Katya over and over. He would apologize to someone who wasn't there. He would cry and say he was sorry, that he never meant to hurt her. But he did hurt her. He killed her. And I kept his secret. When Owen died in 2003, Isabel thought the secret would die with him. She tried to move on, tried to forget, but the guilt never left. It grew heavier every year. I see her face in my dreams, Isabel said. I dream about her parents, her friends, people who loved her. They never knew what happened. They never had closure. Because I stayed silent. Why come forward now, after all these years? Megan asked gently. Isabel looked directly at her, tears streaming down wrinkled face. Because I am 76 years old, I will die soon. And I cannot die with this secret. She deserves to be found. Her family deserves to know. Even if it is 24 years too late. Isabel's statement was formally recorded. notarized, witnessed by 4 law enforcement officials. It was enough for truth, but not enough for prosecution. Owen was dead beyond the reach of justice, but it was enough for Megan and Logan. Enough to finally know what happened to Katya Dvorak, and enough to search for her remains. In May 2013, Megan led a forensic team into the woods off Route 9. Using Isabel's detailed description of what Owen had told her, dense forest near a dry creek bed about half a mile from where the Buick was found. They used ground-penetrating lidar, cadaver dogs, excavation equipment. For 3 days they searched, and on the 3rd day, they found her. Katya Dvorak's remains, buried in a shallow grave beneath 24 years of forest growth, leaves, soil. She'd been there all along, less than half a mile from where her car was abandoned, less than half a mile from the road where hundreds of thousands of cars had passed, where joggers ran, where life continued while Katya lay forgotten in dark earth. Forensic analysis confirmed what Isabel had described. Blunt force trauma to the left side of the skull. Katya had been struck with a heavy object, causing immediate unconsciousness and death within minutes. She hadn't suffered long. That was the only small mercy. The forensic anthropologist also found something else: Katya's work permit, the laminated card she'd been so proud of, still in the pocket of her decayed clothing. The card that said she was allowed to exist, allowed to have a future Owen Brooks had stolen from her. On May 15, 2015, 26 years after Katya vanished, Connecticut State Police held a press conference. Detective Megan Phillips stood at the podium, gray-haired now, 52 years old. Beside her stood Logan Pierce, 64, retired but present. They announced that Katya Dvorak's killer had been identified. Owen Brooks, a Czech immigrant who'd murdered Katya in February 1989, buried her body and fled to Czechoslovakia. He died in 2003. His sister's confession had solved the case. The story made Connecticut newspapers, ran on a few national true crime blogs. Then it faded. Katya Dvorak saw a brief moment in the light before disappearing again, this time into the archives of solved cases rather than unsolved mysteries. But for the people who'd known Katya, the ending brought something more valuable than headlines. It brought closure. It brought the chance to finally say goodbye. And it brought the promise that Katya Dvorak would never be forgotten again. Allison Blake, now 88 years old and using a walker, organized a memorial service at the East European Cultural Center. 50 people attended. Some who'd known Katya, others who'd only heard her story but felt compelled to honor her memory. They lit candles, sang Czech songs Katya would have known, stood before her photograph enlarged and placed on an easel. A young woman with dark eyes and a hopeful expression. Frozen forever at 29, they remembered. Megan and Logan attended the memorial. Logan was 72 now, walking with a cane, hair completely white. But his eyes were clear when he turned to Megan and said, "I waited 26 years to see this. 26 years wondering if we'd ever know the truth. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for caring about an immigrant woman the system tried to forget." Katya's remains were buried at Cedar Hill Cemetery in New Britain. In the immigrant section where dozens of others rested beneath simple stones. But Katya's grave wasn't simple. Allison had arranged for a proper headstone using funds donated by the Cultural Center. The stone was polished granite, dignified, permanent. It read, Katya Dvorak, 1960 to 1989, not forgotten. Below that in Czech, Domov tam, kde tě pamatují. Home is where they remember you. Allison visited the grave every few months until arthritis made the trip too difficult. Then others took over, people from the Cultural Center, former co-workers from the restaurant, strangers who'd read about Katya's case and wanted to ensure she wasn't forgotten. White roses appeared on her grave regularly. Who left them? No one knew for certain, but they never stopped coming. Year after year, white roses, proof that Katya's memory lived. Logan visited the grave one autumn afternoon in 2016, a year after the memorial service. He brought flowers, white roses like the others. He stood there for a long time, leaning on his cane, looking at the headstone. Finally, he spoke aloud to the woman he'd searched for but never met. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you in 1989. I'm sorry it took 26 years to find you. I'm sorry the system failed you. But you're not alone anymore. You're home now, and we'll make sure your story is never forgotten. Meghan closed the case file officially in June 2015, stamping it solved in red ink before filing it in state police archives. But before she did, she made a copy, the entire file, every document, every witness statement, every photo. She took it home and added it to her personal collection of cases she'd solved over her career. Because Katya Dvorak's story wasn't just a murder case. It was a story about systemic failure, about how immigrant lives are devalued, about families who wait decades for justice, about the importance of refusing to give up even when giving up seems easier. On the last page of her personal copy, Meghan wrote in pen, "Katya, I'm sorry it took 26 years. I'm sorry the system failed you. But we found you, we brought you home, and now your story will be remembered. Rest in peace." Owen Brooks's family never issued an apology, never made a public statement. Isabel Scott gave one interview to a Prague newspaper, then refused all further contact. She closed her door to the world and lived her final years in silence. Owen's grave in Prague is unmarked, a plot number in a city cemetery where no one visits. But Katya's grave receives flowers every year. White roses, memory made visible. The East European Cultural Center expanded in 2018, opening a new building with modern facilities. On one wall, they created a memorial display with photographs of longtime members, founders, volunteers who'd built the community over decades. Katya's photo is there from 1989. She's smiling, young, hopeful. Below the photo, a small plaque. Katya Dvorak, 1960 to 1989, the heart of our community. Never forgotten. The studio apartment building where Katya lived was demolished in 2010, replaced by a modern apartment complex. No one remembers that Katya once lived there. But Victoria Hayes, before she died in 2012, had saved some of Katya's belongings. Books, a sewing box, letters, a note in Katya's handwriting. Victoria's daughter donated them to Connecticut History Museum. They're now part of the Immigrant collection. The note, translated from Czech, reads, "Domov není místo, kde ses narodil. Domov je místo, kde tě milují." Home isn't where you were born. Home is where you are loved. Megan Phillips retired in 2020 after 35 years of service. At her retirement speech, she talked about cases that haunted her, cases that taught her important lessons. Katya Dvorak's case was at the top of that list. "This case taught me that justice can be delayed, but it must come," she said. "Every victim deserves a name. Every victim deserves their story told. Every family deserves the truth, no matter how long it takes to find it. And we, as law enforcement, must never give up. Never." Logan Pierce died in 2018 at age 75 from a heart attack. His funeral was attended by hundreds, families whose cases he'd solved, colleagues he'd mentored, officers he'd trained. Megan spoke at the service, voice steady despite tears. "Logan never forgot Katya Dvorak," she said. "For 29 years, he carried her case with him. He kept her file in his desk. He reviewed it every few months, hoping for a break. When I reopened the investigation in 1995, Logan's first words to me were, 'Thank you for caring.' That's who he was. A man who cared when others didn't. A man who refused to let people be forgotten. Now he can rest, knowing Katya's truth was found." Route 9 has been widened and modernized since 1989. The old forest road where Katya's car was found looks different now. More lanes, better lighting. Guardrails where there used to be open shoulder. But at Cedar Hill Cemetery, Katya's grave remains unchanged. The granite headstone, the Czech inscription, and every year white roses. Who leaves them? No one knows for certain. Maybe cultural center members, maybe former co-workers, maybe people who heard the story and wanted to ensure Katya knew she wasn't forgotten. The flowers keep coming. Memory persists. In Connecticut State Police Archives, Katya Dvorak's file is marked Solved 2013. But in Megan Phillips' home office in a filing cabinet marked Personal Collection, there's another copy. It contains handwritten notes in the margins, passages underlined in red. And on the very last page, in Megan's careful handwriting, Katya Dvorak, 29 years old, immigrant, murdered February 18th, 1989. Found May 14th, 2013, 26 years, 2 months, 26 days. I'm sorry it took so long, but we found you. You're home now, and your story will never be forgotten. Katya Dvorak's case is one of thousands. In the 1980s and 1990s, thousands of Eastern European immigrants came to America seeking better lives. Many succeeded, some struggled, others disappeared, and too few people asked why. This story is fiction, but its foundation is real. The unmarked graves, the unsolved cases, the forgotten faces, the systemic failure to protect the vulnerable. Justice sometimes comes late, sometimes it never comes at all, but every victim deserves to be remembered. Katya Dvorak in this story is finally remembered. Her grave bears witness to a simple but profound truth. Home is where they remember you. And Katya, after 26 years of darkness and silence, has finally found her way home.